My name is Jan Burns. I'm Head of Eligibility for Virtus. Virtus is the International Federation for Sport for Athletes with Intellectual Impairments. We're very pleased to be able to be here in Fiji. We've been running a workshop on how to become eligible as an athlete for Virtus competition. Virtus runs a high-level performance sport for people with intellectual disabilities and other impairments like autism around the globe. We really are very pleased to be able to work with Fijian organisations and representatives to develop pathways for Fijian athletes to have the opportunity to participate in high performance sport. We've had an excellent 2 days here in Fiji. We've worked with people from the Special Olympics, we've worked from people from the Fiji National Sports Commission, teachers, coaches, parents and psychologists from the university. Together, I think we're going to develop a very interesting and exceptional pathway for our athletes with intellectual disabilities in Fiji. In terms of the next step for Fiji, I think there are two really clear steps that we need to take. One is we need to find an organisation that will be the Fijian Virtus representation, a representative organisation here in Fiji. Becoming an organisation that's a member of Virtus then means that we can work together to develop these opportunities. I think the second step is we have to work with the university and we have to work with the students and the psychologists to develop and build on the training that we've had over the last 2 days to develop the eligibility processes. The eligibility process is very important because that is the gateway into these opportunities for high-level performance sports for people with intellectual disabilities. The timing of this workshop has been excellent because we have one of the first events that is going to happen at a regional level in November this year. That's the Oceania Asian Regional Games. And that is when all the member organisations for Virtus and Oceania Asia area come together and we have a very large competition. We're expecting over 1,000 athletes and officials and supporters come to Brisbane in November to compete in these regional games. We will have a wide range of sports over 6 days. It's a fantastic opportunity. So the timing for this workshop in Fiji is an excellent opportunity to get people on that pathway to perform in Brisbane in November. So we look forward very much to seeing our Fijian friends at that event. So in terms of developing sport for athletes with intellectual disabilities and high performance sporting opportunities, there are two main routes into this. One is through the Virtus events that Virtus organises, such as the Oceania Asian Games, which will be happening in Brisbane in November, and also national events and other regional international events that happen. Now those events are just for athletes with intellectual impairments, but the other route, and in a way an even more important route, is through the sports-specific organisations such as athletics associations, swimming, table tennis, all the other games, to include in their competition schedules athletes with intellectual disabilities. So what we're seeing in other parts of the world is, for example, within I can think a good example is in rowing in the USA. In all of their rowing competitions, their national rowing competitions and their regional rowing competitions, they now have competition classes for athletes with intellectual disabilities. So what we really need is the Fijian athletics, swimming, other sports associations to take on that role and promote and provide opportunities for competition for elite athletes with intellectual disabilities. Our role in Virtus is to manage the eligibility of that, and that's what this workshop's been around. So basically, the Virtus system will make sure that the athlete has the intellectual impairment. What we'd like you to do is develop the opportunities for those athletes to compete in your sport. So when we're talking about athletes with intellectual impairments, we're mainly talking about two groups of athletes. We're talking about athletes with intellectual disabilities. So those people who are intellectually challenged, who find learning and development difficult and have been compromised in their opportunities. So many of these people, for example, might have autism or other syndromes, or there might be just no known reason why they have intellectual disabilities. But they will have problems managing with everyday life and the intellectual development and skills that they need to get into employment and other opportunities in life. The other group that we work with as well are people with autism. There's a lot of people with autism, which is a condition, it's a neurological condition, which means that people find it difficult in terms of communication and certain behavioural skills and opportunities which might be challenging for them. So we're talking mainly about a type of disability that is invisible. You might look at somebody and not know that they've got an intellectual impairment, but it starts to emerge when they're involved in tasks, difficult tasks that they find difficult in everyday life. So our job in terms of Virtus eligibility is to make sure that the athlete we're talking about fits this diagnostic criteria of intellectual disabilities and impairment, autism. Over the last 2 years, we've all been working with a pandemic. That's had very serious consequences for people with intellectual disabilities and impairments. These people are at much greater risk in terms of having serious COVID symptomology and even dying. The death rates have been much higher for people with intellectual impairments. What this means that because of their risk factor, they've tended to be isolated more, quarantined more, reduced their activities. So if they're a sports person, they've tended to stop doing their sport, stay at home to protect themselves, which has been very wise. But what this means also is those opportunities have gone away. We need to build those opportunities back up, and we also need to encourage the confidence of these previous athletes with intellectual disabilities to come back out, take up these opportunities. That can be quite difficult for somebody with an intellectual impairment who's been repeatedly told that they need to take good care, protect themselves. So suddenly sort of reversing that and saying it's safe to come back out now and we can provide the sport is quite difficult. So it's taking a little bit longer for some of these athletes to come back to competition. Obviously their performance might well have been affected because they've also been out of sport for a while, so they will need to build up their fitness and their health again. Right. This opportunity in Fiji is the start of what we hope to see is a good progression of development within the Pacific Islands. As member nations in Virtus, we have Australia and we have New Zealand. We're really hoping that Fiji will be our next member nation. However, we're well aware that there are 13 other Pacific islands. So my ambition and what I'd really like to see, and hopefully I'll be invited to come back in a few years' time, is to see that all of those together, 14 Pacific islands, have a member of Virtus, and that they have a pathway for elite sport for athletes with intellectual impairments. In future regional games, I'd like to see a lot of Fijian athletes there, and who knows, in a few years' time, I'd also like to see Fijian athletes with intellectual impairments compete within the Paralympics.